Act 3. Well, there's a military cliche that says something like, generals always refight the last war over and over. This next story is an illustration of that principle, even though it is a very different kind of war than the ones you've heard about so far in today's show. John Hodgman tells the sorry tale.
Here is something I'm not quick to admit, even to close friends, never mind on the radio. Every day, for the past several years, I have been working on a screenplay. This, of course, is shameful on its face, but it gets worse, believe me. Working on my screenplay has been very hard, because the story I'm telling is long and complex and important. It's also difficult because I'm not actually writing anything down. Until recently, I would only think about it, night after night, lying in bed, rewriting my screenplay in my head. And as this process tends to make me sleepy, I have actually not gotten very far. I began my screenplay on May 19, 1999, a date that may resonate with some of you who may already guess at the other main challenge of my project, the one that lends it the extra measure of sad delusion and ultimate futility that accompanies the writing of any screenplay, and that is that my screenplay has already been written by someone else, and it is called Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. You will recognize this music, of course. For many people, the opening fanfare embodies just about the sum total of what The Phantom Menace got right. Next, the familiar text crawls up and out into the galaxy. The taxation of outlying trade routes is in dispute, we're told. And with this particularly rousing line of exposition, the bewilderment and shock and sadness begins. We know this now, but think back to the peculiar, exciting year that was 1999. Slightly crazed by the end of the millennium, we impeached a president for the first time in 131 years. We started paying English majors huge sums of money to create something called content. And in a still disturbing bout of mass hysteria, every American man grew at least one kind of goatee. And we waited for the Phantom Menace. This was when the internet was at its peak, still largely ruled by passion more than commerce, and in many ways it had found its perfect expression in sites like theforce.net and Starkiller, the Jedi Bendu script site. Anarchic, collaborative communities of information obsessives, building a model of what this new Star Wars movie would look like only from rumors, stolen photographs, and leaked script passages. And it somehow felt important that I spend at least an hour a day looking at them, and not just insane. Well, this wasn't always a good thing. When I first downloaded an unofficial audio clip of Jar Jar Binks' quasi-Caribbean step-and-fetch-it whining, I spent a long moment staring doubtfully out the window before quietly deleting the file. But still I had hope. Jump to early May 1999. I saw The Phantom Menace first at a private press screening thanks to a journalist friend of mine who either sympathized with my obsession or feared what would happen if he did not indulge it. It was probably the first time in history one could go to a new movie, as I did, knowing every scene, every line, front to back. As the lights went down, there was a feeling of joy and imminence in the room. The nation was prosperous and relatively peaceful. I was sitting next to the movie star, Jon Favreau, and Star Wars was coming to fulfill a promise it had made 22 years ago to a generation now coming into its own. When the lights came up, though, something had changed. Something had broken, and I couldn't put my finger on what it was. The ideas were good, I kept saying as we left the theater and drank for hours afterward. There was so much promise there. How could it have all gone so wrong so quickly? I started revising that night. First of all, I thought, Anakin Skywalker would have to at least be a teenager. What made George Lucas think we would be okay with the idea of an elderly man taking a 9-year-old boy away from his mother, Jedi Master or no? That's just creepy. And one of the great pleasures of any Star Wars movie was always the one planet, one climate concept. You had your desert planet, your ice planet, your swamp planet, your cloud planet. Yes, the Phantom Menace had a city planet, but that had already been done with the Death Star, don't you think? So what is it? What comes after Cloud Planet? Occasionally I would sneak away from my desk and call my friends. I've found a solution to the Jar Jar problem, I would say. But mainly I would lie awake at night, alone, and ponder the big questions. What does Darth Sidious want with Naboo in the first place? What were those glowing purple balls of energy the Gungans were always tossing around? And of course, if Obi-Wan Kenobi knows R2-D2 from the Phantom Menace, why doesn't he recognize him in Star Wars? At this point you will want to know, what is the solution to the Jar Jar problem? I understand. Everyone hates Jar Jar. In fact, everything in my screenplay flows from this very simple fix, and that is, replace him with Sebulba. Okay, Sebulba. You remember the villain in the pod race, the cranky Joe Camel-looking thing in the World War I goggles who walked around on his hands and almost beat Anakin? Switch that guy, Sebulba, with Jar Jar, and what you get is an angrier, more interesting character who accidentally gets his life saved by Obi-Wan Kenobi during the invasion of Naboo. Then this hybrid character, let's call him Jarbulba, he now has to follow Obi-Wan around until he has a chance to save Obi-Wan's life. It could take years, Jarbulba would explain, to their mutual dismay. But for now they're stuck with each other. Obi-Wan, the snobby young Jedi from the big city, and Jarbulba, the bitter malcontent with a heart of gold, like Sidney Poitier and Tony Curtis in The Defiant Ones. This is a good change for 3 reasons. 1, Jarbulba becomes the cynical Han Solo figure the film so desperately needs. 2, he actually has a reason to go on the rest of the adventure. And 3, creatures walking on their hands are cool. But this is only the beginning. In the actual Phantom Menace, the Gungans, Jar Jar's people, have no real purpose in the story. In my screenplay, they do. In my screenplay, it turns out that they're preternaturally sensitive to the Force. And Darth Sidious, the bad guy, needs them like bloodhounds to track down this powerful new concentration in the Force he's been sensing somewhere on the edge of the galaxy. But Jarbulba is a Gungan, and he leads our heroes to this concentration first, which turns out to be a teenager on Tatooine, Anakin Skywalker, who uses the Force to win the pod race and is then accused of cheating, thus having to flee with our heroes who need his skills as a pilot. And so, as Act 1 concludes, Obi-Wan is captain of a crew he can't stand, bound by fate to a strange, hand-walking freak, and forced to watch as the dashing and not 9-year-old Anakin captures the heart of the queen that Obi-Wan secretly pines for himself. I will stop talking now. This is the moment in discussing my screenplay that I begin to feel more and more like someone standing on a cold corner mumbling to himself. And also, this is as far as I've gotten. It's been 31 months, some 960 days of work, and I've only made it to the end of Act 1. Long after Episode 2 has come and gone, I'm still trying to get Episode 1 down, even though I know I never will. Because even in the midst of my mania, I know I'm trying to repair something more than a script. The Phantom Menace was the beginning of the end. Think about it. It came out in May 1999. And was it a coincidence that the economy then collapsed? That all the promise and light of that time went with it? That my mother became suddenly sick and soon died? That our country was attacked? That we went to war? Well, probably it was a coincidence. But there's a reason I would work on my screenplay while falling asleep. At night, dozing in the hospital while my mother was dying, or when I was awake in bed in October 2001, listening for planes over New York City. When all daylight and distractions were exhausted, instead of feeling angry or panicked or sad, I could ask myself, what if? What if Jar Jar and Sebulba switched places? What if Naboo were a sunken planet? Where all that was left of a once great world, a shining civilization, were the tips of mountains, the tallest spires of the cities, just poking up above the water's dark surface. Is that what comes after a cloud planet? It's an odd compulsion to tell a story correctly. We feel it every time we tell a joke or interrupt our spouse in the middle of the one about the time we drunkenly broke into the London Zoo. Wait, go back, you say. Wait, go back and start over. And maybe this is not really born of a desire to get the beginning right, but to avoid ever having to come to the end. I know it's futile to go on with my screenplay, and to tell the truth, it isn't offering me the same kind of comfort that it used to. The story will end the way it ends. All I really needed was to get this far. As Obi-Wan and Jar Bulba, Anakin, and the Queen fly off from the desert planet, the point where the adventure is just starting, with everything still promised and unknown. Because beginnings are really the only happy endings.
John Hodgman in New York City.